Somewhere in the mountains of Central Asia, there is a plant that has been killing pain since before Rome was an empire. Ancient physicians called it the greatest gift the earth ever gave to suffering men. For 2,000 years it was traded on the Silk Road, packed into caravans beside gold and silk, because kings and soldiers and surgeons knew what it could do. Then in the 20th century it disappeared from every pharmacy, every medical textbook, every doctor's office in the world. Not because science disproved it, because no one could make money from it. If you want to know what else they buried, and there is more, much more, subscribe to this channel right now. Every week we uncover and share valuable herbal knowledge passed down through generations while uncovering forgotten plants and remedies that have played an important role in cultures around the world. This is the story of Corydalis, the painkiller that worked for 2 millennia and was swallowed by silence. The story begins not in a laboratory, but in the highlands of Siberia, China, and the Himalayan foothills, where Corydalis yanhusuo has grown wild for longer than recorded history. The plant is modest to look at. It rises less than a foot from the ground, puts out pale purple or yellow flowers in spring, and dies back in summer. It looks like something you would step over without thinking. But beneath the soil sits a small tuber, the size of a walnut, packed with compounds that would take modern science nearly a century to understand. The first documented use appears in Chinese medical literature from the Tang dynasty, around 600 CE. But the Benxiaogongmu, the great Chinese pharmacopoeia compiled by Li Shizhen in 1596, gives it its clearest early portrait. Li Shizhen documented Corydalis across 43 medical conditions: pain from traumatic injuries, chest pain, pain during menstruation, headaches, and abdominal cramping. He wrote that it moved the qi, circulated the blood, and stopped pain. He prescribed it in powder, in wine, and in decoctions. He called it yanhusuo. The name translates roughly as the herb that extends the delay of suffering. Physicians who used it understood the name. Pain did not vanish instantly. It retreated, like a tide pulling back from shore. The Silk Road carried it westward. Persian physicians encountered it by the 9th century. Arab traders packed it alongside cinnamon and cardamom. By the time European herbalists began cataloging Eastern medicines in the 16th century, references to a pain-relieving tuber from the Eastern trade routes appeared in multiple manuscripts. But Europe, drowning in opium from the poppy fields of India and Persia, did not pursue it. They had a more powerful tool. They did not need another one. The real story of what Corydalis contains did not begin until the 20th century, when chemists learned to isolate individual compounds from plant material. In the 1920s, Chinese and Japanese researchers identified the first alkaloids in Corydalis. By the 1940s, the compound DL-tetrahydropalmitine had been isolated. Pharmacologists called it THP, and what they found when they tested it stopped them cold. THP acted on the brain in a way no natural compound had been documented to act before. It did not bind to opioid receptors. It did not work through the same pathways as morphine, heroin, or opium. It targeted dopamine receptors, specifically the D1 and D2 subtypes, blocking them in a way that interrupted pain signaling without triggering the euphoria and dependency that made opiates so dangerous. In animal studies, it produced analgesia, sedation, and muscle relaxation. It also showed something that startled every researcher who ran the trials. It appeared to actively block the development of morphine tolerance. Animals given THP alongside morphine did not build up resistance to morphine the way control animals did. Corydalis was not just a painkiller. It was potentially an anti-addiction compound. But this was the 1950s. The golden age of synthetic chemistry had arrived. The pharmaceutical industry was not looking at tubers from Chinese hillsides. They were looking at molecular blueprints. They were looking at compounds they could patent, manufacture at scale, and sell at a controlled price. THP, extracted from a wild-growing plant, offered none of those advantages. No patent, no exclusivity, no profit model. Research stalled. Papers were published in Chinese journals that Western medical institutions largely did not read. And Corydalis returned to the margins. What grew in its place was an industry. By 2023, the global pain management market had reached $80 billion. Americans alone purchase 34 billion aspirin tablets annually. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen and naproxen generate tens of billions in yearly revenue. Opioid prescriptions, despite the addiction crisis they sparked, remain among the most profitable pharmaceutical products in history. Fentanyl, oxycodone, hydrocodone. Each one patented, each one priced, each one requiring a doctor's visit, a prescription, a refill, a pharmacy. The system creates recurring revenue from recurring pain. A plant that a subsistence farmer in Sichuan province could grow in a backyard garden had no place in that system. The addiction crisis that opioids created became its own industry. Methadone, buprenorphine, naloxone, each a pharmaceutical answer to a pharmaceutical problem, each generating its own revenue stream. 100,000 Americans died of overdose in a single year. The pain industry responded with more products, more patents, more recurring prescriptions. And still the researchers who read Chinese medical journals kept finding the same thing. Corydalus worked. In 2014, a study published in Current Biology by researchers at the University of California, Irvine, tested the active compound levotetrahydropalmitine, the isolated left-handed version of THP, on mice. They tested it against inflammatory pain, neuropathic pain, and injury pain, three distinct pain types that respond to different pharmaceutical mechanisms. LTHP reduced pain across all three categories. Then they did something more revealing. They tested it under conditions that simulate chronic opioid use, where standard painkillers lose effectiveness as the body adapts. LTHP maintained its effect. The mice did not build tolerance to it the way they did to morphine. The study concluded that the compound acted on multiple pain pathways simultaneously, which is why it maintained efficacy where single-target drugs failed. A 2019 review in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology pulled together decades of Chinese clinical data on corydalus use for dysmenorrhea, the medical term for severe menstrual pain. The data showed significant pain reduction in women who had not responded adequately to NSAIDs. No significant adverse effects were documented across the studies reviewed. The compound worked where the drugs prescribed by modern medicine had not been enough. A 2021 study examined the neuroprotective properties of corydalus alkaloids. The same compounds that block pain signals also appear to inhibit acetylcholinesterase, the enzyme targeted by some Alzheimer's medications. The plant does not simply dull pain. It may protect the brain while it does so. The knowledge of how to use it was never entirely lost. Traditional Chinese medicine practitioners prescribed it continuously across 2,000 years without interruption. In China today, corydalus is a standard component of pain formulas sold in pharmacies across the country. It is listed in the Chinese pharmacopoeia. Clinical hospitals use it. Patients receive it after surgery. But in the United States, in Western Europe, in the medical systems that control global pharmaceutical standards, it remains invisible. No FDA approval. No insurance coverage. No prescription pathway. No place in the formularies that determine what doctors are permitted to prescribe. You can buy it online. Capsules and tinctures appear on supplement websites, marketed cautiously, hedged with legal disclaimers. The FDA has not scheduled the plant. It is legal to grow, possess, and sell. But without standardization, the quality is unpredictable. Some products contain meaningful concentrations of active alkaloids. Others are largely inert. The knowledge of how to extract, standardize, and dose it correctly was buried with the generation of pharmacists who last stocked it in the West. This is the pattern that history repeats. Not a conspiracy engineered in a boardroom. A system that rewards what can be patented and ignores what cannot. A medical education structure that teaches the drugs that pharmaceutical companies fund research to develop. A regulatory framework that requires clinical trials costing hundreds of millions of dollars. Trials that no one will fund for a plant that belongs to everyone. The result looks like erasure because it functions like erasure. 75 million Americans live with chronic pain. 1 in 5 adults worldwide reports chronic pain as a daily reality. The pain management industry projects revenues of $120 billion by 2033. And a plant that reduced pain across 2,000 years of recorded use sits in supplement stores between the melatonin and the fish oil, with no medical guidance, no standardized dosing, and no physician who learned its name in medical school. The plant still grows. In the mountain provinces of China, in wild patches across Central Asia, in the gardens of practitioners who never abandoned what the old pharmacopoeias recorded. You can identify the tuber if you know what to look for. Pale, roughly walnut-sized, with a faintly yellow interior that stains your fingers. Traditional harvesting occurs in summer when the aerial parts die back and the tuber has concentrated its alkaloids. Dried and powdered, it has been administered in doses of 3 to 10 grams in classical Chinese practice. Modern supplement products typically standardize to a percentage of total alkaloids, though without FDA oversight, that standardization varies. The researchers who kept working on it in Chinese universities and hospitals kept publishing. The papers accumulated. The evidence compounded. And in the margins of Western medicine, a small number of scientists began paying attention. The 2014 UC Irvine study was not an isolated event. It was the visible tip of a literature that had been building since the 1940s, written largely in languages and published in journals that Western medical institutions did not prioritize reading. What they tried to bury was not just a plant. It was a model of medicine that did not require corporate infrastructure to function. A healer in a Tang Dynasty village and a Confederate field surgeon and a Chinese hospital pharmacist and a forager in the mountains of Sichuan all accessed the same knowledge, that this tuber, prepared correctly, reduces pain. That knowledge passed person to person for 2,000 years without a patent, without a marketing budget, without a direct-to-consumer television advertisement telling you to ask your doctor. The pharmaceutical industry will tell you that wild plants are inconsistent, unstandardized, and unproven by modern clinical standards. They will not tell you that 25% of current pharmaceuticals are derived from plant compounds. They will not tell you that morphine, still prescribed in every hospital in the world, comes from the opium poppy. They will not tell you that aspirin began as willow bark. They will not tell you that 2,000 years of documented human use represents a form of evidence that no 12-week clinical trial can replicate. Corydalus did not fail. It was never given the infrastructure to succeed in a system built around patents and recurring prescriptions. It grew in the wrong kind of ground, the kind anyone could cultivate, the kind that generated no quarterly earnings report, the kind that asked for nothing in return. It is still there, in the mountains where it has always grown, in the formularies of practitioners who kept the old knowledge, in the hands of researchers who read across languages and did not limit their sources to what the pharmaceutical industry funded. If this opens something for you, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. Every week, we unveil something they hoped you would never find. Share this with someone who needs to know. The knowledge only survives if it keeps moving.